dialogue. And we don't want him to leave before all of you have to engage with him. So Minister Parks, come over to set the tone for the first panel. Then straight after that, I'm going to ask the panel to come through. The team can put the chairs there straight after Minister Parks. Minister?
Thank you very much, JJ. Good morning to the Deputy President, the MEC, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. If I may start with an addition to the point that you're raising about financial services, and suggest that we must also, in that dialogue, call the trade unions. Because in fact, they sit on the boards, they are members of the boards of trustees. And the question that they have to engage with all of us is what role do they play in directing where investments go? There's a time when in the city of Johannesburg we needed to raise money in the debt capital markets, but because the trade union was on strike, they resolved not to invest in our bonds. That's the level of power that they hold, that in fact they can decide we're not going to invest in a municipal bond. And they instructed the fund manager not to invest. Why did you take my machine out? Okay. It's not me that decided not to use the iPad, so I can speak without referring to the iPad. Let me say that there was an earlier point that said that we need to hold people accountable for the work that they do and hold each other accountable for transformation. And I was whispering to colleagues on the table that it's two ways. We must hold each other accountable. For indeed, we in the public sector need to continue reporting on the work that we do. We need to be held accountable. And we need to be held accountable against critical indicators around transformation. But a lot of transformation actually happens in the private sector. And in there, we also need to hold each other accountable. We need to answer questions, and I was asking colleagues during the week, if in fact, as reported by the B-BBEE Commission over a period of about 3 years, and the Commission has not necessarily corrected me here, we spent in excess of 100 billion in skills. Why do we have a skills crisis in the country? Now the question is, when you tick the box that says we are complying to B-BBEE, as you sit in boards, as you sit in management structures, are you actually measuring the output and the outcomes, or are you measuring the input? Because indeed, if people say to you, we have spent so much on skills to comply to B-BBEE, and you tick the box that says, my scorecard is level 1, have you measured the actual outcome of the investment that you've made? Are you able to say that as a company, when we've invested so much in skills, we can measure the actual skills that have been generated? Or do we continue to send children to fly-by-night colleges that give them certificates that do not have much value? We had a conversation, as indicated by the Commissioner, with the Sector Charter Councils this week under the theme Beyond Compliance. And we're saying beyond compliance because we need to have a conversation that says we can't continue talking about measuring input. We can't continue having conversation about who has complied to what level, what have the verification agencies said, how much have we spent on enterprise and supplier development, how much have we spent on socio-economic elements, how much have we spent on skills, and not answer the question, what actually has that meant from a transformation point of view? And what has it translated into? Now, I'm starting that deliberately also because we tend to make the mistake to only refer to the ownership element as what constitutes broad-based Black economic empowerment. Now, we were sitting in a room with the colleagues in the with the charter councils, and the room was predominantly Black, and when I say Black, I mean African, Indian, colored. And there were 2 white women in that room. And we all agreed that that room is 100% transformed. 100% transformed. Because remember, during apartheid, white women were not allowed into executive positions. They were not allowed to own. They didn't sit in senior executive positions by design. So patriarchy was institutionalized under apartheid. So when we said we're 100% we're sitting with chairpersons and CEOs of the transformation councils, and not all of them are owners of companies, but all of them are beneficiaries of broad-based Black economic empowerment. Because in the positions in which they sit, we measure progress as a country of how far we've come. So we should avoid this notion of thinking that broad-based Black economic empowerment constitutes only ownership. And that when we say we've made progress, we're not measuring, we're counting the number of CEOs in the banks who are Black. And you can throw around the names, Kenny Fihla, Mary Vilakazi, Fanny Titi, Sim Shabalala. And you can talk to the number of people they have employed in their executives. And you don't call them broad-based Black economic empowerment. So we must measure the things that constitute transformation. We must measure the number of executives, we must measure the number of people that attain skills as a result of the broad-based Black economic empowerment policies. We must measure enterprise development, we must measure supplier development. So somebody providing services in a mine, in Palabora providing a truck there. When it gets to the commissioner, he talks about it in the graphs there. But in reality, that person in Palabora, that person in Nongoma, that is providing a service to a particular enterprise, who is measured against enterprise and supplier development because they procure from them, whether it's catering, trucking, whatever, whether it's consulting services, and a whole range of other services being provided to companies that are not the public sector. Those people are participating in broad-based Black economic empowerment. And when we ignore that reality, that in fact broad-based Black economic empowerment is counted beyond the stock exchange. It is counted inside the stock exchange as to who they procure services from, how they participate in enterprise development, how they enable skills. Then we measure in broad-based Black economic empowerment for its reality. Now you're talking about professors here. There's Professor Mohale, there's Professor JJ, there's Professor Are you professoring yet, Doctor? Now, the professors keep quiet when there's a professor that says only 100 people have benefited from BEE. As a reference. So one of our colleagues wrote to the university and said, hey, can the professor account for this thing? Or no, academically, there's something fundamentally wrong in what the professor has done. Sorry. So we will track whether Wits University will answer the question. Mara professor, ingathi akayibalanga kahle lento. Asike simbuze professor ukuthi kanti lento isebenza njani. Now, where are we? Okay, thank you. I had promised myself not to speak for long because there's a panel that's coming. But I'll just give an update on some of the work that we're doing. In relation to the Transformation Fund, we are in the process of finalizing the SPV. We received the license, the financial services license to run the Transformation Fund. We have published what is called Statement 400, which is an amendment to regulations that govern enterprise and supplier development contributions. It is intended that we would have received comments by the end of March. And I was saying to colleagues, it is only the opponents of transformation that are commenting. The proponents are quiet. As we talk about Statement 400 and the amendments that need to be made to enable private sector contributions. Stakeholders have nominated board members, so BBC, BUSA, etc., they've nominated people to serve on the board, so we're in the process of finalizing the board. We've had contributions from private sector entities and public sector entities into the Transformation Fund. As we finalized our session into the Afrexim Bank, the Africa Export-Import Bank, we agreed on a program for South Africa that is 8 billion, minimum of 8 billion US dollars, that would come into investments in import-export initiatives, and agreed that 3 billion of that would be dedicated to the Transformation Fund. So I think we're standing at about, how much now? 13 billion rands. We will be launching for people to start applying in March. And of course, they've developed complicated systems of how the applications would be done. No. Oh, okay, simple. No, it's simple because the system itself evaluates you before you get to the subjective considerations. So essentially you'd be able to follow your application from A to Z. You would know whether you're complying and what your gaps are. So in relation to the objective of the Transformation Fund, we're on track. We will be processing applications for funding, and it would be blended financing. It would be concessional structures. It would come with support systems. So the deal that we have, for example, with Afrexim Bank also talks about market access, technical support, and so on. So if you want to sell products primarily into the continent, but also all over the world, you would be able to access that facility. So from the end of March, you should be able to access the transformation fund. The question has always been, but at what point do you get the private and public sector contributions into what would be an annuity contribution to the fund? Because if they contribute their ESD and other components into the fund, it becomes an annuity investment. And as I said, we've published Statement 400 for that purpose. And on the basis of that, anticipate that we would be able to get annuity contributions on a more regular basis. So the emphasis on my side is that we have significantly moved forward with regards to the transformation fund. In the spirit of accelerating transformation, we are also doing a number of things as directed, and the President said so in his State of the Nation address. That we will initiate in the next financial year, starting in April, a process of a review of the entire architecture of broad-based Black economic empowerment. Policy, legislation, regulations, institutions, financing mechanism, what has worked and what has not worked. We are doing it with the intention of accelerating transformation. Because all of us can agree that there are a number of elements that have not worked successfully. But there are also issues of application that has been difficult. And an example was made earlier by the chair of the NEF and the B-BBEE Advisory Council, and she said, you know, part of the problem that we have as we implement BEE is that sometimes, because these transactions are mainly vendor financed, meaning that the company that empowers finances the company that is being empowered. One is they choose their own friends. So they choose who they want to. And then people say, but it's a public policy decision. It's not a public policy decision. We don't sit in the boardroom as the ministry that decides that actually I want this one to be my BEE partner. But a bigger part of the problem is that because it is all debt, a lot of the colleagues don't even see the dividends as they are declared, because all of that goes towards paying off the debt. By the end of 10 years, you've paid off the debt and you are still poor. And you look at these shares and you say, I am now selling. Because you want your money in your pocket. Why would you have been doing this BEE thing without the intention of having money in your pocket? So in essence, even as we do this, the graphs that the commissioner was presenting, and we're talking ownership, a lot of that is actually debt, and it's not actual wealth that is accrued to people. Now we must review, when we say we must review everything and say what has worked and what has not worked, so that we can improve on the outcomes. Firstly, you would want a level playing field. It can't be that only the networked get access into the transactions. There are people that equally have capability that might not be as networked as those that are already in the transactions. So how to ensure that they are able to gain access? How to ensure that people are able to participate in the wealth that is being created and gain value from the investments. And of course, at the end of the 10 years, when colleagues sell their shares, then the companies say, yeah, but it's once empowered, always empowered. So after they sell, you can't tell us that we are now losing our BEE status. So we can literally revert back to being a white company, but still maintain the same level of BEE. So we must fix those things that have not worked and accelerate those that have worked as we talk about transformation in BEE. So for us, I think the discussion is we're having this conversation at the right time because we will be accelerating within the current legislation, but we'll also be driving a review of the entire architecture of broad-based Black economic empowerment. Thank you very much.
During COVID, okay, please can we have the chairs and the panelists? We're going to have a brief panel before we allow the Deputy President to engage with us. While we're waiting for the chairs, please. Minister, thank you very much. During COVID, Minister Nchabeni, at that point she was Minister of Small Business, simplified the form for the application of the funds. So I asked the question, but why was the form complicated in the first place? Why do you introduce a barrier? You say, fill the following 10 pages. And then if you miss one page, they say, sorry, you've been disqualified. So I was worried when you said that when we apply for a transformation fund, they're going to make a process very complicated. Oh, it's automated. Oh, not complicated. All right. All right. Mr. Reddy, I would like you to join this panel, please. I know you're on panel 2, but I would like you to join this first panel. Can we get our panelists, please? You know yourselves. Let me read here. Ms. Komotso Silokani, CEO at Heron Marine, please join. Ms. Lulama Sikriti from the IDC, please join. Mr. Nemokula from the Transnet, and then the CEO of the Devon Chamber. Those palaces. All right, we're here. We need one more chair. All right. Okay, brief. You have all microphones? You don't have a microphone? Do you have a microphone? All right, please start. You don't have to go to the podium, but you'll be the only one to the podium. The rest can speak from where you are. Okay. Are you waiting for a presentation?
I'm waiting for the...
All right.
start?
Yeah, it looks like should we get someone else to start? You want to kick us off? Yeah. Is our microphone on?
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, everyone, and be upstanding. Deputy President, Minister, MEC, honored guests. Firstly, Jay, I must say thanks very much for bringing all the big guns and the professors to KZN. We're the orphans of all these kind of functions, and it's so important to be here, and we really thank you for arranging this. I think I looked at a slide and it said the property sector is the least transformed in South Africa, and that's an absolute fact. In fact, it's a disgrace. Let me give you an example. When Sandton was being built, 26 billion rands worth of construction work was going up. I drove past every one of them. Was not a single board showing any black. When I'm talking about not even African, colored, or Indian professionals were involved in that project. Contractors, and this is what happens. When people want to tender for government work, they go and find black partners. But in the private sector is an absolute abuse of the system. And I'll tell you what I did. When we were doing the oceans development, I decided to change things. Firstly, we ensured that the contractor, the professional team, there is 90% blacks were involved. We insisted on the contract. It's a 5 billion rand project that employed 6,000 people. We insisted on a contractor that he had to employ 25% black women, females on the site, and they did it. 15% of them were all youth. And at the end of the day of the 5 billion rand project, 3.5 billion went to black subcontractors in SMME. If the private sector, we do not force empowerment as property developers, and that's what you've got to do, Minister, Deputy President. You need to bring private developers. They're developing hundreds of billions rand worth of projects in South Africa, and say, you've got to enforce empowerment. You've got to do it. The black professionals are crying out aloud. And then the other big issue that was raised is the views of banks. I'm not even going to name them. We had 2.4 billion in secured sales. 500 million cash put into the deal. The main contractor had problems. They went to business rescue, and then came along COVID, and the banks used every excuse to pull out of the deal. And they pulled out of the deal. And they thought the project, but you know what I did? We went to the pension funds and we got the project, a 5 billion project. The Oceans Umhlanga has got not 1 cent of bank funding. I decided I'm going to abandon the banks and I'm not going to go to them. And the pension funds benefit from the involvement. And that is why the talk about, and which was very aptly raised, about the pension funds using their funds to create infrastructure development. They've got it. There is, right now the laws have changed. They could use up to 5% of their funds on infrastructure, and that's how we're going to change the scene in South Africa. We need the pension fund, especially the PIC, to get involved and support property developers, and that's how we're going to transform the landscape. And it is very, very interesting listening also along the line with suppliers. Along the line, you find them, it is really, really unfortunate what's happening in the construction industry. And let me tell you what we've done in Ocean. We're building the last tower now, 1.4 billion. We insisted with the contractor that that contract has to be built by a black African contracts manager, and he is there. Rumbi, he's building, and on his team, he's got 5 African black females running the job, engineers. And that's what we got to do as private. You got to force private developers, got to enforce development and empowerment on the projects. Otherwise, South African, we will never change. 30 years' time, we'll be coming back here, and the property industry will be untransformed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Auspili, please follow up on what he was saying.
Yes, no, thank you very much, JJ. I also just would also like to add on to the appreciation of the frank dialogue coming here to our province. It's a very, very important conversation actually for us here in the province, because what we see is we see very little transformation, especially in the private sector. And I think just to start, Minister, is I think you need to look at certain laws that can enforce even harder companies that say, look, we don't need BBBEE, we're trading with each other. There's so many of these that I've seen on the ground where you have, it's a white company trading with other white companies, and they're just not interested and they don't care about ensuring that they're compliant with BBBEE. So enforcing such harsh laws, I don't know what you can do, but you need to have some sort of harsher penalties for those kind of companies to make sure that they are able to comply. And then number two, another very important thing is, I think from us, and everybody knows, the implementation is a big problem, even in government itself. So we really, really need to see how we can be addressed, how we can work better, and how we can get much more commitment from people to make sure that BBBEE works. If people don't trust what government is doing and saying the problem is they give these deals to each other and to their friends and everybody else, and other people don't get empowered, it becomes a confidence problem over and above everything, in terms of then those that are not adhering to it then will jump the bandwagon and say, but this is what this thing is doing, and how do we, how are we then able to address it? And finally, Minister, I think although this point that I'm going to be making is not necessarily on BBBEE, but it also touches on a bigger, wider problem that we have. I mean, when we look at the unemployment numbers, when we look at the growth in the country, we don't realize some of the bigger factors that are actually causing a lack of growth in the country. I'm going to make you an example. The issue of illicit goods. I know that the President mentioned it in his State of the Province address, but I'm going to make you an example. 2 years ago, there was 18 million tons of toilet paper that was imported into our country. These are cheap imports coming in, imported into our country, and guess where it went? It went into the spaza shop businesses and spaza shop areas. And guess who suffered? So we've got guys here, we've got small SMMEs here in KZN that make toilet papers, but they suffered. Some of them had to close. So making sure that we control what is coming into the country, whether it's cheap imports or illicit goods, become a very, very important element in terms of growth, overall growth for the country. I'm going to stop there. I know that it was more around BEE, but I felt that it was so important for me just to highlight some of the barriers that are preventing us from growing our economy as a country. Thank you.
So before I let you go, Auspili, can you tell us frankly, what is the conversation within the chamber? Because you are saying there must be enforcement. It means that it seems like that somebody must come and crack the whip in the chamber. What is the chamber saying, right? Because the chamber, I assume, in broad terms, this is like the cream of the crop of the business in Durban, or rather in KZN, right? Yes. What is there political will in the chamber for change to happen?
Look, remember, the political will is not going to come from the chamber, but it's about what is the chamber doing on issues that are affecting their members. So to be honest with you, the issue of cheap imports, we did reach out to Minister Tao's office. We've got the commissioner for ITEC, Ayabonga. Ayabonga is going to be here to talk to our members about the cheap imports, because I must say, when people heard about the China agreement, trade agreement that you're signing, there was a huge panic here. because people are thinking, geez, industries are all going to be killed, what's going to be happening? So Abango is coming here to do that. And on the illicit goods, we're already engaging with Transnet, SAPS, Customs, we're going to have a meeting. So we're already starting to say we need to have a meeting to talk about how do we make sure that, you know, these illicit goods stop coming in so that, you know, the economy can start growing and saved. Thanks.
All right. You want to hook up on that to just let us know what do you think should be done on the financing, right? Or a refinancing of BEE, in your view?
Thank you, JJ. I must greet again. My name is Lula Maskriti from the IDC. So a question came earlier to say what is real transformation. I want to attempt to answer that. I'm going to speak of meaningful transformation coming from the DFI. So we need to unpack what that is. Transformation is not triple BE. Transformation is broader than that. And I can mention a few levers that make up that. We need to look at equity. We need to ensure that equity is taken care of. To insert black businesses in the broader economy, we need to take care of equity. We need to look at capital investment. That is a big call. Dr. Ntamsen spoke of it earlier. And we need, as DFIs, to ensure that there is a capacity for that. We need to look